has not thought a lot about it. And I'm not a great reader. I'm not a great sight reader at all. So there were a lot of things like, especially like rehearsal bands and whatever, that I'd just kind of be lost, on the first, I could always count measures. I could always keep my place in the score. I couldn't put my fingers on it at first, but people knew if I'd take it home, I'd be okay. And or if we had a second run through where the trumpets are doing their thing, figuring out their articulations, I could kind of get my reading a little better, so I learned how to do that. It was very stressful, actually. I've told some people when they put hard music in front of me that I'm working very hard. I'm working much harder than a lot of other people that just read. And I don't know how it is for you, Michael, but do you read well?
I studied classical music when I was younger, so I have that background of just reading sheet music.
Yeah, like
So
chord symbols and rhythms too. Like sometimes, you do that, and then sometimes the charts, especially if they were handwritten in the old days, are not quite, you can't. It might be illegible sometimes, so you have to sort through that. And basically, this is not where I was going to go with it, but since there's not so many people, one of the things that really helped me later was this book called Inside the Score. Are you guys familiar with this?
Yeah.
Written by a guy named Ray Wright, where he takes apart Thad Jones' music, Sammy Nestico's things like Count Basie stuff, and Bob Brookmeyer things. And it really, this I had, and Thad Jones music. So when I played with Thad Jones, I remember when this book came out, I'd already left the band. And I said, oh, geez, I really wish I had this book when I was with the band, because it has the scores and it has an analysis of everything. And then it has the piano part. And depending on what guys write, I know Thad Jones, when he wrote, the first pianist was Hank Jones. So Thad wrote very sketchy for piano because a lot of what Thad knew harmonically derives from his older brother Hank anyway. And then the next pianist was his friend from Detroit, Roland Hanna. And it's another case where Roland would, kind of make up his part. So this thing really helped in what I tell my pianists all the time. One of the things as a piano player is you are creating a part. So, and I think that goes for rhythm sections in general. Generally, especially if a horn player writes the chart, the horns are going to be pretty detailed. And then the rhythm section could be anything from chords to just not even anything. So you have to kind of look at what you got, hear what the band is doing, and then create a part. And then you don't necessarily write that part for yourself, but I bring a pencil along. So if I have a chart, I'm lightly penciling in what to do. And that really helps out. But anyway, so Inside the Score, Ray Wright, who I never got I think I did meet him once at the Vanguard, but he was teaching at Eastman. He's a brilliant orchestrator, and he analyzed this music like no one else did. And so after I got that, I was much more aware of what was there in the band. And also, if the band is very thick, that I don't need to play. And in Thad's case, it's very full. So the piano part is kind of what to leave out rather than what's there. So I don't know if you all, I got this "Don't Get Sassy" is that's the object of today. Don't get sassy, I guess. But the piano part on "Don't Get Sassy" has so many chords. I mean, just unbelievable amount of chords and rhythm throughout. And Has anyone ever dealt with this chart at all, Michael? Okay, so anyway, if you might know why it's written this way, I don't know, this is a jazz history question. Like in Thad Jones' book, why would there be so much information? And then you're not indicated whether to play or not. Does anybody know? Anybody? Okay, I'll tell you the answer. The answer is that in the beginning, this is one of the early charts. Thad Jones's band had a guitar player named Sam Herman. Sam Herman was also the copyist. So this thing on Don't Get Sassy really looks like a guitar part to me, because it's got everything. And then, as I told Glenn when he sent me this, because I hadn't had it, I don't think I ever saw this particular published chart when I was with the band. I think there was maybe a pencil chart. So this is really nicely done, as far as, especially the opening at letter A. There's a piano solo which has the melody, and it's nicely written out with just really beautiful. I don't think I ever found that exactly when I was trying to scuffle through it, but it's really, when you've got a little two-staff opportunity to read, and I'd probably have to take this home, I'm sure, but then I'd have a better idea if I wanted to really play the melody. Sometimes when you have an intro as a piano player, they don't want you to give away the melody. So as I played this chart more with the band, I would just, like, the band comes in full force after letter A. I think it's letter B, a tutti. And then so kind of save it for there. So I tease around with the melody. Maybe that much or maybe not that much. And then when the band came in full force, I hadn't given anything away. And I learned that with singers too, and whatever. It's like a couple singers that I worked with, you have an 8-bar intro. And it's like, don't give away the melody, or play a suggestion of melody from the bridge or something, but don't just play 8 bars of the melody and then the singer doesn't. Leave a little surprise, set it up in a certain way. So those are things you would kind of learn. Once again, it's what to leave out, and it's creating a part. For instance, in this thing, if you really heard the original, there's like a shuffle rhythm that Mel sets up. Mel Lewis was one of the great shuffle beats. And a shuffle beat really comes from boogie woogie. It has that thing. So this piece, as much as it's got modern harmonies, when has that kind of thing, it really comes from like the feel is, where is it? Let's see. It really comes from that. And one of the things as a piano player, Michael or Jesus, have you ever played boogie woogie? Never played a boogie woogie?
Yeah, I have played boogie woogie.
Yeah, I'll tell you. I mean, it's not one of those things I do publicly, but if I can't play a shuffle, in other words, are you all familiar with? There's a great Wynton Kelly solo on Kind of Blue on Freddie Freeloader, the track he plays on. It goes. The really great solos, and one of the first assignments. Has any of you ever got that as an assignment to take Wynton Kelly's solo? You did? Okay, here's my idea. Play that, because I think Wynton Kelly played in church, and Wynton Kelly became famous in the 50s, but in the 40s, when he was an upcoming player, they all had to play boogie woogie. Bill Evans even said something like he was a hellfire boogie woogie pianist. Now, I came up later, so I had to grab boogie woogie later. But if you were living in the 40s, there were these hits that were boogie woogies. So here's my theory about Wynton Kelly. He probably could have done. and he could have played it with a different one. Because that's there. So when he does, and so I've heard people play this solo and they don't have that feel. And so if you don't invest your body in a boogie woogie thing, as a piano player, it's like breath. It's like a guy that doesn't get much air through the horn. You know, a guy playing a baritone, you know, it's like, so if you're playing, if you don't have that in your bones somehow, you're not going to get it. So I sometimes test myself and just see if I could play, if I've got my own. That's one of my tunes, you know, so it's like, it was supposed to be very hip, you know, whatever. But if I can't play it with that feel, if it's that rhythm, and if it doesn't chunk along in that real shuffle rhythm, because shuffle rhythm really has that. Early rock and roll has that beat too. So you have all that. You have all of that sort of invested rhythmically in however you play your notes. So it means you've got more breath behind it. You've got more support, you know, to make the analogy with a horn player. So you got more bite into the rhythmic things you play. So so that's my thing with this tune, even though it's like so if you're playing an intro on that, and if you've done your little homework and now, so you can make a little hint here and there of it, and all of a sudden, maybe you get another chorus. So also in this particular piece, it happens to be what Thad Jones referred to as an 8-bar blues, meaning, has anyone ever heard that term before, an 8-bar blues? One of the things Thad Jones said, it's like rhythm changes without the bridge. So, you know, rhythm changes, 1-6-2-5. But even beyond 1-6-2-5, if you have an 8-bar blues, I had my little handout here. Hold it up. But I think that's on, Glenn, you've got that somewhere. You can maybe access that. Mm-hmm. But an 8-bar blues, instead of like, you know, 4 bars on the 1 chord or whatever, it uses all the 1-4-5-1, but in 2 phrases. So you have basically a 1 chord. I'll do this in D flat since the piece is in D flat. A 1 chord, 2, 4 chord, 1 chord, 5 chord, 1 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord. So that's basically what this is. So that's basically what the tune is. Now, from that, you know, basically you studied the score. I mean, Thad's genius, and I don't use that term very often, but I was around Thad Jones enough to appreciate that the guy could write a chart overnight. And there was, you know, it comes from a family with Hank Jones and Elvin Jones in it. So, okay, yeah, I think genius. There's something genius there. But Hank, Thad's harmonic sense, which I mentioned before, does come a lot from Hank, if not almost, I don't know what the percentage would be, but a lot from Hank. But if Thad's been goofing around with this, as you can see it on all these chords, he's enriched this. And if you study the score, and I'm getting ahead of myself, one of the other things you do when you're reading a chart is you go through this thing, like letter B is tutti, and letter C is trombone held notes. And then, so that you cue yourself on what to do. And then there's another tutti section, and then there's solo sections. So, like I said, bring along your pencil. I guess people still have pencils and erasers, but write light enough that so that you can, erase it, or so you don't get. I know sometimes they say, oh, don't write on my music, So then that place, keep it to yourself. But so you get all these things, and then you see how Thad. This remains 8-bar phrases throughout. So if you hear the record, and I should have, you maybe brought the record, but I didn't.
I could play it if you want me to, Harold.
Why don't we do that? Okay, just at least the first sections, because we can talk.
All right,
about it.
let me find it.
Okay. Any questions thus far? One of the things while Glenn's setting this up, that the writing in the things, what I learned that a couple ways. One thing is with Thad Jones and Mel Lewis, like I said, the parts were invented by Hank and Roland Hanna. And I think immediately before me, there was Walter Norris that played piano with the band. But there were a few pencil things written in. And then later on, I remember I got a gig touring with Liza Minnelli. I got to go to Brazil, and she'd worked for years and years with Pat Rebelo. And I remember my friend Lawrence Feldman, who got me on that gig. He's a saxophonist. And if you're a piano player and you get a gig with somebody and you're recommended by a saxophonist, it means that you're about number 12 on the list, because they've gone through every piano recommendation. They finally go down to saxophone section and say, Wilson, you got a piano player.
Harold Danko.
So anyway, I know I was number 12. So anyway, but Pat Rebelo had worked with Liza for years and years. And Lawrence said, listen to the cassette, listen to what Pat plays. He didn't write anything because he didn't, expect not to be there, I guess. And I went through and I looked at the score, and I just said, oh, and so I started penciling in stuff the way I heard it. So I was able to, even though I bombed the first rehearsal as far as trying to read the charts, the second rehearsal, I was able to make her feel comfortable. So I had the gig. I got to go to Brazil, make pretty good money for that gig. And then the thing was, I knew I wasn't the first choice, so I didn't bother to write anything in. Then I heard way later when they replaced me, and they got like a #1 kind of New York guy with none of that stuff in, and he probably went in and sight read it. I heard that Liza cried on the first rehearsal. So they fired me after, like a pretty nice tour, and they got who they wanted, but it was a sight reader. So that really proved it to me that you got to do your homework. In those days, it was like listening to a cassette. So that's my heartwarming story about Liza Minnelli crying.
All right, here we go.
Okay. This is solo. It's not really what's here, but. again. Going up to letter A. L trombone note. Yeah, so you get the idea if you haven't heard it before. It's really such powerful writing. So anyway, you see what happened in the beginning, all those, this is guitar stuff. I don't think I ever played on that because if anything, yeah, it's just an indication of what the band plays. So that's what you're sorting through when you have a chart.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Harold, if he had,
Yeah.
did Sam have the score, any scores from Thad, you think, when he wrote this out, or?
I would think probably he did, yeah. Probably had the
Yeah.
score, like whatever Thad might have. I'm not sure if Thad sometimes wrote directly into parts. I'm not sure his process.
Yeah.
I don't know. I know that later on there was some confusion when they wanted to publish the charts. So I'm not sure. I'm sure Sam had a role in that in some way too.
Yeah, because it seems like a lot of that stuff is what the band's playing. You know,
Absolutely,
if you look at
yeah.
the part, it's like all these voicings, moving chords that the band is playing. It's like,
And
how could a piano player play that, even if he wanted to? Yeah.
You know, like I say, my if I had success in that, it's because I could count, measures and be where I was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so when I saw this, I might have played I don't know when I sight read this. Actually, the other story I could tell you is that fortunately, my first gig with Thad Jones and Mel Lewis was a quartet gig with Sam Jones on bass. Not bad,
Yeah.
So I got to play quartet with these guys, and then Mel had known my playing because we played with Chet Baker and also Gregory Herbert, who's my great friend, was in the band, and they were kind of in a transition and kind of auditioning guys who would sight read at the Vanguard that night, and so they hadn't settled on anyone. So, but I was playing with Chet Baker. So, but I was playing with Chet Baker, but Gregory Herbert was touting me to Thad and Mel, and Mel knew my playing a bit. So I somehow got hired for this quartet gig. And I knew Thad's playing from records. I knew Thad's from Mingus records and from the Monk records that he played on. And I knew him a little bit from the Count Basie thing. I gotta confess, I did not know the Vanguard band as well as I should have. But Thad, after a couple sets, came and said, "We've been looking for somebody for the band." And I was like, whoa, it's like, yes, sir. So with that said, Mel asked me if I was interested. And so before I came down, Mel gave me the book and told me like the 12 charts to look at. So my first night with the Vanguard, I at least had that. I had the book over the weekend. So I got a chance to look at it. If I had to sight read that book in front of the Vanguard audience, I've never had that gig. It'd be a different career. I wouldn't be here today, And I'll say this too, like after Thad left, when I would get hired as a sub, and Brookmeyer was writing new music. That's the other thing from the Ray Wright. He talks about Bob Brookmeyer's music in here, in the Ray Wright book. And I remember having to sight read. That's when I got my payback. I had to go to the Vanguard and try to sight read Bob Brookmeyer's music. Slap in the face. There's a beautiful piece in here though called First Love Song, which I ended up recording. And as the piece was unfolding, as I was sight reading it, and it's mainly a band piece, it was like I felt it was the most beautiful piece of music, you know, and it was just unfolding in front of me. And then Brookmeyer, because I think he was dealing with Jim McNeely and Kenny Werner, maybe Jim McNeely at that time, comes through a solo, and then it just said C minor after this beautiful ballad. And like C minor to me is like, you know, so came time for my solo in front of the Vanguard band. I'm like C minor after I just heard this most beautiful song that I'd ever heard. And I don't know what I played. I don't know what I played, but I got through it. And then I got so entranced with the song that, like I said, by the time this book came out with Ray Wright, I was able to really investigate and saw what I might have done with C minor. But I didn't, you know, that's the other thing about some arrangers. Brookmeyer's guilty of that, and I love Brookmeyer. But he dealt with people that knew his music. And sometimes it's like Maria Schneider can be that way too. It's like they deal with, unfortunately, Frank Kimbrough, somebody just died. We just lost him in December. But they deal with some piano player that they really work with closely, and that maybe it's been there in the process. And so they might indicate C minor or C Aeolian or something. And it's like, I used to say, it's like Kenny Werner C minor is different than my C minor, you know. So anyway, that's another thing that arrangers sometimes do, is don't give you enough, you know. So once again, it's about inventing your part. When you get a solo, it's your thing. One thing, the other thing, just the Vanguard band culture, the Thad Jones culture, is like Roland Hanna, who was a couple pianists before me, was an amazing, amazing solo pianist. So Thad used to cut the band out and let Roland go crazy. Well, that happened maybe my first night or maybe my second night. Thad cut out the band. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you know. So it was not too good. I mean, I might have been professional. I might have treaded water for a while, but it wasn't like what, you know. So Thad knew after that, not very much piano solo. He'd turn it over to the trio. And at that point, I was playing with Rufus Reid and Mel Lewis, and we got our little trio thing happening. So all the things that would have been Roland Hanna for 5 minutes were trio for 5 minutes. There's a wonderful thing that I'm very proud of about the band at Nice Festival. And I'm the pianist and Rufus Reid and Mel. And it's a piece called, it's a piece Thad wrote on Love Walked In. It's called Evol, it's backward. Love Walked In backwards. Evol Declaw something. And
Neat.
and it's basically Love Walked In. And I get like 8 minutes in front of this thing with the trio. But that would have been 8 minutes of maybe Roland Hanna. So anyway, that was, you know, just the culture of what worked, and Thad knew how to play on that for sure. And if I was like more overt solo pianist, maybe I would have got solo time that way. But I didn't want it at all. I'm just happy to play chords. Does somebody have a question? I'm not sure. Been talking.
No, Kent just put in the chat a link to your.
Okay.
You know, it's so, wow, man. It's like you and I, all of us on this wavelength again. Last night I was, you know, looking around on the internet before I went to bed and checking out some music and things. And I'm in this Thad Jones Mel Lewis group on Facebook. And this thing just popped up and I hadn't seen it before. And I went, man, that's Harold.
Which one was that?
Were.
Was that in Nice? Was that the outdoor?
Yeah, the outdoor one. It starts with
Oh.
Love Walked In, and It Only Happens Every Time. Oh, it's a great set. And Ambience is on there. with
Okay,
Jerry
yeah,
playing
Jerry
flute.
Godgins.
Oh, it's a really nice set. So if you guys haven't heard that, check it out. It's really neat.
Yeah, it's live at Nice. It was a professionally done recording, but during my long solo, I think there's the trumpet players start throwing spitballs or something. You know, it's just like, wow, I hear a dog there. But anyway, yeah, the vibe of that band was something I'd never experienced before. It was just like so open and, you know, really wild. as far as, you know, being able to feel I didn't make any mistakes. It's like, there's no, you know, like I had said something yesterday in our meeting, like Rufus would save me or Mel would, you know, there was nothing previous to that. I felt uptight. I'm just like kind of hanging on. But once I was accepted into that culture of Thad's culture, it just seemed like anything goes. So all these things, there used to be one of the other things that just about creating your part. If the band goes, you got some spaces in there, and I used to do, they do da da, I would just answer it in some way, and then Thad would kind of give a grunt, you know. So I keep that in or something. So da 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 da, you know. So there's places you play in between. That's once again not going to be on the part. So you just invent that, you know, keep it to yourself, because the next guy might want to do, you know, something different. One of the things I started doing too is strumming on the strings, because by the time I got there, there was not a guitar player in the band. But some of the first charts in the band, like That's Freedom, this one, some of the early blues things, I would reach in and strum 4 to the bar to like a guitar. And that was another thing where the first time I did it, I got a grunt from Thad. That meant like, keep it in. So of course that was something that I worked on and I could do. And then when Jim McNeely joined the band, that wasn't something that he did. So that part was maybe my little signature that I was able to include in some of those things, because I would strum and give that effect as probably Sam Herman did in the original band, for playing 4 to the bar like Freddie Green style. That relates back to that Count Basie thing. So those things are really, you know, you're part of, especially in playing that kind of music, you're part of a bigger picture. And so you got to look at it historically. One of the other things about, you know, when you've got the 8-bar blues, the 12-bar blues, or whatever, I have this thing about riffs. I don't know if anybody has a definition of a riff. Any of you guys that are students have a definition of a riff? Jesus, Michael, anything?
Memorable music phrase that repeats often.
There we go. That's pretty good. Yeah. Michael, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I guess like a phrase that like repeats itself for like a couple of measures. I don't. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like a short, repeatable, and I would say blues scale based, repeatable short phrase. So, and we'll do this in D flat. So there's a couple of variations of the blues scale. The one that everybody knows, you can sing this with me if you want. 1, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5, flat 7. Right? So if you have, like, say on this tune, if you have like, or if you have just a riff, I tell beginning students you should have 10 riffs or 5. First lesson, if your riff is like, the other thing, like I ask students all the time, what's your favorite rhythm? And jazz students go, oh, yeah, my favorite rhythm is oop bop shabam. There's a Dizzy Gillespie record, boop bop ba-da, bop bop ba-da. I love that rhythm. And so anyway, if I want to do an oop bop shabam rhythm, okay, that's one. I can do that in a, do it on one note. I can do it on 2 notes. So start with your favorite rhythm. If you don't have a favorite rhythm, if your favorite rhythm is been listening to the different kind of music, you know. I used to point to people in the elevator, what rhythm are you thinking now? And they'd have their headphones on. If it's, I don't know, not my favorite rhythm. Okay, so find a rhythm, and then you can repeat that. Okay, so you do that on this blues scale. There's another one, and we've got some intellectuals in the crowd. So there's another one that's actually one. They call that the sweet scale. What that is, it's the minor scale. It's a relative major. In this case, we're talking about D flat. It's a relative major version of the blues scale on B flat. So this one that was up here, the relative major of that would be just like where the relative major is. It's early morning. Wow. Anyway, so some people neglect the sweet scale. I learned it from I was in the sauna once. I don't need to describe all this, too many pictures, but there was a blues guitarist that was in the sauna. And he talked about Jimi Hendrix, about using the sweet scale. I said, "What's the sweet scale?" He said, "It says it." And he sang it to me. Ba, 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 da, ba, da, ba. Oh yeah, I've done that. And if you really look at Don't Get Sassy, but the last phrase, whatever it is. So just the last phrase of it tips into that blues nasty scale. So it's like if your baby's been sweet to you, she's so sweet to me. But then if it's little nasty, so those are the two items you can play with, and it's really not talked about a whole lot, but it's so important to just like listen to stuff and like, yeah, if it's a sweet phrase, yeah, Jimi Hendrix, whatever, there'll be a sweet phrase. And that's this relative major blues scale. And so you've got the choice of both of them, and kind of maybe one phrase is one way and then the answering phrase is a nasty one. So you've got your 8-bar blues, or you got your 12-bar blues, or sometimes a 16-bar blues. In the Ray Wright book, he talks about another fad tune. What is it? I think Big Dipper, which is kind of a 16-bar blues. So there's an 8-bar blues, and then there's various things that are 12-bar blues. There's things that are bluesy, meaning that their melody uses some of these elements. Okay, so you get yourself a riff on these things, and you can insert those when the piece is bluesy, or if you're really inventive, even if a piece is not bluesy, there's great, tenor players and whatever. I keep thinking of Gene Ammons or somebody that can make things sound like the blues, even if they're not blues. And that's just the kind of permeating the melody with some of these notes. Guitar players know how to do it. And when I have clinics with young kids, I said, find that guitar player that can't read, is in his basement listening to Eric Clapton. You'll learn some blues licks. I don't like the word licks as much as I like riffs, but you got to hang out with that guitar player. Sorry, Rory. But am I right though? The guitar player would know, like the good piano player will know how to play the Hannons, whatever. They're able to do that, but that guitar player that doesn't know how to read you'll find some blues licks there. So that's what to do. Back to I'm trying to think of this Ray Wright book again. If I get there's some bassy stuff. Sammy Nestico, bassy straight ahead, another kind of bluesish thing you play. there are charts that are, I was really lucky. This is like the Woody Herman thing. And I was on a thing called Bill's Blues, an 8-bar blues in A flat. Once again, this was that was a 12-bar blues in A flat. Don't Get Sassy's an 8-bar blues in D flat. Wow. These tenor players like to honk that low A flat sometimes. So what you have in the older school, the blues and keys that, I mean, guitar players like to play an E, I guess, or A, but the tenor players and whatever used to like to play in the flat keys. So Bill's Blues was a A flat blues in was an A flat blues that I recorded with Woody Herman. I was very lucky to get on that. And my little heartwarming story on that is that it was an 8-bar blues. I mean, it was a 12-bar blues, and it was in A flat. And I had an intro, and I was trying to play everything I knew. And after a couple like I wasn't bringing the band in right, I guess. And after a couple takes, Woody comes. This is my first recording session. Woody comes up to me and says, "It's only an intro," you know. So I meant like, do the thing, set up the band. And so I did. The next thing, I played it much simpler, and I brought in the band right. And that was the take that got on. And then my solo was actually transcribed by Dave LaLama in the chart that they published. So my first record date, I actually had a published little intro solo that thanks to Woody, I simplified. And you know, the other thing about what is your solo doing when you get a solo? Is it bridging something that you're going to bring the band in? It's one of the things to really understand as a rhythm section player and as a piano player, and maybe even as a horn player. What's your solo functioning as in this chart? Is it, are you going to play everything you know all the time, or are you going to set up the next section, or where are you coming out of it? That was like one of the things where Thad allowed me to play solo that one time. I mean, I had nowhere to go, but if I would have had the presence of mind to just say, okay, there's a new setting here, and I'm going to calm it down, I could have maybe worked with that and then built it back up to where the band came in. So you're looking at that dynamic thing. What's your solo supposed to do? Are there going to be backgrounds at some point? You have to play into that. So you really learn how to be elastic about the dynamics of your solo. And that's one of the great things about playing with a larger ensemble. Even though, like I said at the beginning, I had no aspirations to be a big band pianist, but I learned plenty of stuff with that. And with that said, there's a couple other charts I'd like to point out. Big Dipper is something we talked about, which is like a 16-bar blues, so all the bluesy stuff you know. One of the guys that doesn't get much playing, I don't know, Kent or anybody, Jerry Mulligan's charts are really interesting to play because dynamically that band is doing something else. It's very full, but the dynamics are much lower level. And a piece like Walk on Water, which was my favorite of the Mulligan stuff, has a little intro. It's in 3/4 time, and what you get, because you get a lot of chord symbols, but you get just has that sort of thing. And then, so that's all it has. But then you kind of carry that through, that sort of thing as the chords change, that sort of lilting waltz-like thing that you get a little taste of from the intro that's written out 2 stabs. And then you have to carry that feel into the rest of the piece. So that's one of the other things you're required to do as a piano player playing in the big band. And once again, if you don't have the score to study, I'd recommend, like any band director has the score, and it would probably let you borrow it overnight if you need to find out what to include and what not to include. And that's always a good thing. you know, whether it's like another piece that I played a feature on was Child is Born. And so to look at that chart finally and understand what Thad wrote was very important. I didn't do it at the time. I just played what I did. But now I'd understand a little more of what was in his orchestration. And then you get another kind of chart, like this is back to the Woody Herman book, Four Brothers, just like straight ahead chord symbols. What you have sometimes is the in this one, in this particular thing, which I found, they've got it written out, 2 staves. Once again, not what I would end up playing. I would learn from this, but I'd probably play less than what's on here, because that's another one that just starts full. Jimmy Jufrey's arrangement. It's a classic, Four Brothers, just starts straight ahead and there's solos. So all these kind of variables of the kinds of charts you have. So I just went up in my library and found these as examples of different kinds of charts that you require to scope out different ways of playing. So, and yeah, any questions up to this point?
Yeah, Jim Pugh said he was you were his first roommate on the Woody Herman band.
That's right, boy, big band stories. Yeah. We hardly ever did double rooms, but this one time, and he was a new guy on the band. He was some guy from Eastman, you know. So anyway, but he was clean anyway, you know. It's like just fresh. So yeah, but they said, okay, like he's rooming with you or something, because there weren't enough rooms for everybody. So yeah, I had to take on the new guy, you know, so, but he's had a very successful career.
Yes, he has.
Harold, I have this is kind of a silly tangential question, but just since you were in the midst of these things, it seems like a controversial point. So A Child is Born, you know, a bunch of people have said that Roland Hanna had this thing he would noodle around with all the time, you know, and that Thad heard it and turned it into A Child is Born. And other people said, no, that was Thad's tune, that's all wrong. Do you know anything about that? It's just, it's got to be Thad's most famous.
It would be, yeah, you know, like, because we got like, you know, I mean, it's something that's very pianistic. I could see that, you know, like what I'd heard about, I think I heard it about Benny Carter too. Somebody said, don't ever whistle anything of your own around Benny Carter, because it's going to be in a score somewhere. You know, it's going to be in a movie. And it's almost unconscious. So I don't know that there was, because I mean, Roland stayed with the band. It could have been a suggestion of that sort of. As a sort of kind of modal thing. And then, so I don't know, it'd be very interesting. I don't think there was a direct stealing of it, or Roland would have spoken up and left the band. But I've heard that Roland had said that too, that, you know, it was like kind of an idea that came from him. But, you know, Duke Ellington famously did that. What's that?
Yeah, but not that it was like a full-blown thing where Roland Hanna had the entire melody all mapped out and stuff.
I don't think, I think it was maybe more of a suggestion among the many things that Roland would play. I attended a workshop back in the early 70s before I was in the Army, and it was with Roland, it was Jazz Interactions, or I think I forget what it was called, the Jazzmobile, Jazz Interactions, a thing in the early 70s. And Roland would just play, and I knew he'd played with this Thad Jones band, but I hadn't heard the band. And he would just, you know, he just was like effervescent with melodies and whatever. So it could have been one of those things. And then Thad did it, you know, much in that tradition of Ellington too, you know, that like those things would be like co-written. But in this case, I think Thad probably developed it. One of the things Thad told, one of the only directions Thad ever gave me was on this tune. And this is written into the chart. To come back to B flat there. Because I was going. Dad wanted me to come. He said, "I'm in that thing, go back to B flat." So it was like, before it goes someplace else. So that was Thad, with all the other things that was the only direction I ever got. So he must have had invested some of his own compositional thing to really think that that's important, because I thought it went, but it's resolution and then somewhere else, So there's such craft and genius with Thad's writing that I think Roland would maybe in his heart of hearts, he would have liked to get co-composer credit in some way. But he must not have thought about it a whole lot, because he stayed with the band.
Yeah.
And played that tune as a feature too. So
yeah,
that's a great question, though. One of those historic things.
Rory, how come you have a saxophone in your room there? Somebody was visiting?
No, it's my secret tenor saxophone studies.
Oh, okay.
But since it's secret, I won't mention it.
All right.
Yeah, you don't want to give away the secrets.
Right.
Cool. Well, we're just about out of time. Does anyone else have a quick question for Harold?
Yeah, I do. I'm always this guy when we have clinics. I feel like I'm always the person that asks all the questions. Okay. Boy, you make so many interesting points about the different lengths of blues, and so much of what we've done over the years has come from Kansas City, because those different forms were extant, in the 30s.
Yeah.
And there are recordings of some of those musicians, not always musicians we think of as jazz musicians, but that sound was there. And also this thing that you refer to as the suite scale, which is also sometimes called major blues scale as opposed to the minor.
Sure. Yeah.
And I've found it in my studies of Lester Young. I mean, Lester's the guy who played that sound.
That sweet sound. Yeah.
Yeah. And those notes are there in his solos, especially the early ones.
Yeah.
How he came upon it, I don't know, but it's there. But I was really fascinated because, I've known you a long time, and I've known about your strumming thing like a guitar. And to me, it's really interesting that when you started doing that, Thad goes, "Oh." And I think, okay, so there's something about being a piano player and leaving space so that someone can hear the rhythm guitar, which I have to think that comes from, what was it, 8 years at least that he spent with Basie's band.
Yeah.
And that he was used to hearing that texture clear out. I don't know. Do you have a thought about that?
I think you're right. I've never thought about it in that way, but yeah, he put all that time in there, and in the Basie band, and Count Basie was the best at leaving space. I mean, geez, and then he made the most of minimal stuff, and all the while that attraction of just the strum bass. I mean, the strum guitar along with just the quarter note, and I think that pulse was very important. And if you look at the early charts that Thad wrote, the first number one in the book was That's Freedom, which is Hank Jones's music. So that gives an indication of what I'm saying too. It comes from Hank in a way, harmonically. And Hank wrote that tune, Thad wrote the arrangement. And then one of the most amazing things to me, I just did a Thad Jones duo record, which I'd be happy to send to anyone who wants, with a Italian bass player, Simone Manami. And we did Thad Jones charts, and I was faced with okay, what do I leave out? I'm not going to try to do what Hank did, because Hank played a Thad Jones record and all those voicings were there. And that's another thing that must be from Hank. Yeah. And when the other thing that I'd seen Thad do is sometimes sit at the piano and play, and he sounded like a very heavy-handed Hank, It's just because he had the big hands. His voicings were the same. The touch was pretty rough, but
I saw Thad sit at the piano once in Youngstown when he came, and he sat at the piano and he pointed to each finger. Second trombone, third alto,
yeah,
baritone. He knew every finger what instrument it was going to be.
yeah, it was pretty amazing. So that sort of thing where he played the piano, and then from his brother for his own concept, and then from hearing Count Basie and hearing that rhythm section and wanting the quarter note, a certain beautiful sort of every quarter note really meant something, and those guys really were committed, in those rhythm sections to making the most of that. And then if somebody like a Mel Lewis puts a shuffle rhythm over that, then it becomes the next thing, almost that goes to rhythm and blues kind of in the late 40s or something. That's not the Joe Jones sort of thing, but that sort of really giving the quarter note its due. Very important. Wow. Any other questions? Students, anything?
No, it was wonderful. It's just great hearing you speak about all the insight, how you think about the blues. It's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for coming. Glenn,
Yeah.
thanks for having me.
Yeah.